All right, we are live. Those of you watching on YouTube, those of you watching on protectingtherepublic.com, those of you watching on Silicon Curtain, thank you and welcome. Jonathan and me are very happy to have our special return guest, Ilya Ponomarev. And forgive me, Ilya, if Americans who might be watching of a certain generation, I always want to call you Ilya Kuryakin. So if I ever do that, forgive me. It's just you are my man from Uncle. So anyway, you're much better looking. But anyway,
thank you.
Thank you for being here. If we could, we were discussing just before we went live some, I think, very positive information about some transfer of technology, about some technology that Ukraine will be getting in the near future that I think will be a real, I hate to say shot in the arm, but it's going to be good news for Ukraine. As much as you can, Ilya, can you discuss a little bit about that, that you're allowed to or can talk about?
Right now, it's a very interesting process unfolding. Because the current administration in Washington, they are saying, okay, so we were giving so much to Ukraine, now it's time for Ukraine to give something to us, and this is the area where it's actually a positive thing, because that actually strengthens the ties, and I think that if these new technologies that emerged in Ukraine would actually be adopted by Western armies, that definitely would decrease the chances of the next war. It would be a powerful deterrence factor. But the problem is always there. All generals, they always prepare for the previous war. They never prepare for the future war. And it appeals to all NATO generals as well. The new leadership at the Department of War in US, I think they woke up, and they are right now.
Don't use that word woke. Don't use that word woke.
Yes, you're right.
Hegseth will be very angry.
You're right. Nevertheless, they are now ringing all the bells.
Yes.
I heard a brilliant speech that was given by Jen Driscoll, the U.S. Secretary of Army, at AUSA conference a month ago, where he said with a very straightforward words, he was using F words, and the audience, which was like 3,000 people, stood up and applauded when he was saying that U.S. is actually falling behind Ukraine, that the modern day Silicon Valley is in Ukraine, and it's a big shame, and it needs to be fixed, because otherwise US would pay with the life of its soldiers. And he is absolutely right here. That's a new generation of war has arrived, and US is not ready. And right now, I would say that there is an unfolding competition between Europe and the United States. Most of European countries are already speaking out loud that they need to adopt Ukrainian technologies, and Ukrainian manufacturers, as well as Ukrainian government, for quite an understandable political reason about what's going on in the peace negotiations, they are way more leaning towards cooperation with Europe than with the United States. The thing is that Europe is dominated by the mammoth state holdings, and I think that it's extremely hard at the end of the day to develop a framework that is beneficial for Ukrainian companies, and that would allow a smooth tech transfer from Ukraine to Europe. And I think that actually, despite all the difficulties, despite all the uncertainties that are related to the peace process, I think that US would be first. And I think that actually Europeans would soon start to buy a lot of Ukrainian technologies from the United States at the end of the day, the way things go. But it's a process. It would take time. It would take some effort. But I right now see that Pentagon is putting all the bets there.
We've had a great example of that today, haven't we? It just seems that sort of breaking a few hours ago, a Russian Kilo-class submarine was taken out in Novorossiysk by, I think this is a world first if it's confirmed, that is a subsea Ukrainian drone. So again, leading the way in not just technology, but actually an extraordinary impact. I mean, these submarines, I have no idea what they cost, but they're not cheap. And the ratio to what the drone would cost is extraordinary.
You're absolutely right. Actually, it's an interesting thing, because when they are saying that the generals, they always prepare for the previous war, actually what US government was always asking for is for submersible drones. And the Ukrainians didn't have them. Because, there are not so many submarines in the Black Sea. And also, there is a fundamental problem with submersible drones. It's very hard to remotely navigate them, because you need to have a satellite link, and so it has to be something above the surface, so that you can control them. So there were a lot of technical work, and actually a lot of this work was inspired by this what it seemed pretty outdated and stupid requests from some people in DC that we want a submersible drone. But because of this, one was developed, and now we have to put it to use. And that's what you saw in Novorossiysk. It's an example. I think that many of Ukrainian technologies, they are way more cost effective, because this submersible drone, I don't know the exact price of the one that was used. It was developed by some people that I know well, and I don't know what's yet the price tag they managed to come to, but my anticipation is that it has to be in the range of $1 million. The above the water USVs, so unmanned surface vehicles, as they correctly called in the military language, these unmanned boats, they are priced usually between 200,000 to 300,000. So they're significantly cheaper, but usually the devastation that has been caused by them is significantly more. But okay, so let's play with the Russian submarines in the Black Sea as well. It's just that they would not be able to hunt those submarines which are moving. So the submersible drones, again, because of the issues with the navigation, they are good for stable objects. So they originally were envisioned as something to fight against Crimean breach, something like this. But because again, Russian Black Sea Fleet is totally paralyzed, and it stands still in Novorossiysk Bay, so why not? Yeah,
why not?
Yeah.
And I have to ask, I guess, a contentious question here, and that is, I get the distinct impression that where you have Witkoff and Jared Kushner negotiating on the one side of the table with Zelensky and today Meretz on the other, it's not just the US with Ukraine trying to broker a ceasefire and then take it back to Russia. I get the distinct impression that actually the US contingent there is very much putting forward the Russian position, the Russian point of view. That's what a lot of activists believe. If we were to take that point of view, is it not also a risk potentially to share cutting edge technologies with the US at this point, when actually within Europe and many in Ukraine actually regard the US as becoming something of a risk, something of an adversary, as opposed to an ally?
General, I think that unfortunately the whole thing is that those guys are thinking as they are on another planet. They're thinking in totally different dimension. And I even gave once an advice to Mr. Yermak when he was still in office that Ukraine needs to put to negotiation table somebody of their alikes, like let's put Kolomoisky, who is right now in prison, a famous Ukrainian oligarch, to negotiate with Witkov. I think they would find each other and taken Kolomoisky's brilliance here in the art of making deals which are favorable for him. I think it would be way more favorable deal for Ukraine in this in this sense. But we've got what we have got. I think that Witkov and Kushner, they're very much motivated to negotiate some peace and do it quickly. I think that Russia is actually seducing them, not even with making business with Russia, which I think that many people recognize would be impossible for the years to come. But they're seducing them with doing business in Ukraine by unlocking the frozen funds, spilling them into Ukraine. Ukraine becomes a large construction yard, so these real estate developer guys would benefit from these processes. And for this, they need peace. And obviously, what they are suggesting is what they think would be a peace which is lasting enough, to actually make this business. I just think that they are too rationally. That's the mistake that has always been made by many people of business. They assume that their counterparts are rational persons. But if Putin would be rational, he would not have attacked Ukraine in 2022.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because the calculation in terms of the balance of power, he didn't have enough manpower to occupy Ukraine. It was obvious. I even made the same mistake. I didn't believe that Putin would advance because it was obvious that it's something that is not feasible. So right now they also think that it's unfeasible for Putin to advance to Europe, to attack Baltic states. But I don't think that Putin is thinking this way, and that's why, unfortunately, a lot of mistakes at the negotiations table are being made.
It's disturbing, David and I getting into the irrationality of Putin's mind, because I was firmly convinced that he would invade full scale, and I think David too, and that's disturbing to think that we can in some ways empathize with someone as perhaps unhinged as VVP is.
Well, the thing I wanted to say about the Witkov and these jokers, these real estate people, is I still don't think most people realize that Trump, Witkov, and all the people that surround him on these so-called negotiations, they're not just looking for the United States to make a killing deal to rape Ukraine. They are looking for their own personal fortunes. Trump personally wants to make money out of this. Witkov personally wants to make money out of this. And I have no doubt that in the Kremlin, they are just blowing whatever up their butts and making deals individually, telling them how rich they're going to be out of this. Yes, I agree with you, Ilya, out of what's going to happen in Ukraine, unfortunately, but they're looking for personal gain, which is what Trump and his criminal cabal have been all about. I mean, look, they're real estate moguls. They have no interest at all in democracy or human rights or international law. They're looking at how much money they can personally make out of any deals, and that's how they're negotiating, nothing more.
No, David, as sad as it sounds, I think that everybody especially in the foreign policy, in international politics, is being motivated by personal greed. It's just not always this greed is in money. Sometimes it's in some political benefits. Sometimes it's in the role in history. Some pedestal. Some monument.
But Ilya, this is a new level of greed and corruption that this country, us, the United States, has never seen. It just isn't. It's without precedent. Yes, it's been there in other ways, but it's never been such naked corruption as we have now. They're actually proud of it. And this is something new to us. We're naive little children here. We actually expect people to obey the law and look what's best for their country. And boy, have we been sadly surprised.
David, look, some people, they condemn those people. Some people, they praise those people in the United States. It's like, it's your crocodiles. You have elected them. It was a legitimate election process.
Absolutely, 50% of us are absolute morons. I agree.
We have to deal with it.
Oh yeah, no, I realize that. No.
And
that's why you're here, to tell us how to deal with it and get us out of this cesspool.
But what I'm saying is that, to my mind, this greediness and this simplicity and this straightforwardness is actually a way easier thing to deal with than Biden's, very nice democratic statements, which did not materialize in actions that needed to be taken.
I agree.
Because if he would be genius about democracy and stuff, he would definitely do something on the Russia front itself, because the origin of this war, as Putin likes to say, we have to treat the origin of the conflict. The origin of the conflict is in Kremlin. The only way how you can end this conflict is not with some peace deal. It's a ceasefire. Yes, you can achieve the ceasefire. You can pacify the situation for a while. But if you want the war to end, there is only one way to do it, is to destroy the regime in Moscow, is to change it. That's the only way, because that's the origin. You need to treat the source of the illness and not the symptoms. So,
and I would say that's that's an interesting one, because of course the other assumption, and let's assume that Trump, for various reasons, wants peace. I think he genuinely does want peace, whether those are selfish motivations or not. That actually is not that important. But they are assuming that Vladimir Putin is driven by the same things that they are: the desire to enrich themselves, the desire to be in some ways, I would call it economically rational. Even if David would say it's criminality, it still has an economic rationality to it. But if you listen to his minions, and we've got a particularly vile one in the UK called Andrei Kelin, who's a little, he looks like a toad, and he speaks, he's just revolting in every sense. He's a pro-genocide, pro-regime, absolute piece of filth. But he came out and did an interview. Now, I'm not sure why the media still interview him here, but he came out and he clearly said, there is no peace process. There is no peace deal. We are not interested in that. We want the surrender of Ukraine. It's like every Bond villain. He just came out and said exactly what it is that Russia wants.
No, you're absolutely right. You see, I am physicist by training, and there is such thing as dualistic nature of light. So light is a wave, and light is a set of particles. So Putin is, in certain circumstances, he behaves like an imperialist. In most others, he behaves as just a greedy oligarch. And you cannot say what is primary, what is secondary in his nature. To my mind, where he's coming from, he is coming from just financial motivation and greediness and desire for luxury life and whatever. But I don't think. I think that he's being as a trained FSB KGB officer, he is genuinely imperialistic because it's part of his training. But I don't think that's what motivates him in life, because all my observations of Putin about people who he likes and who he picks up in his inner circle, and you can always tell a lot of about a person based on his friends. He's a completely unideological person. He's not Hitler or Mussolini. He doesn't have a grand idea in his mind. He even doesn't have the idea of a restoration of the Soviet Union. He's not driven by ideas. But he is already past the stage when money was giving him security. Now, to secure what he has got, he needs to have power forever. And his power is based on just one particular thing about him being victorious all the time. And his imperialism, his imperialistic wars are the result of a necessity to regularly demonstrate the victorious nature of his regime. It's a very similar thing as what we already witnessed in history in France in the 19th century. Not that I witnessed it with my own eyes, but it's well described in the books with Louis Bonaparte III. And it was exactly the same thing. So he came as a Republican leader. He converted to become an emperor. He had imitational democratic processes within the country. He never controlled 100%. He had parliament. He held elections. He had media. But on all elections, he was getting 2/3 of votes because of falsifications. All the media, they were controlled by oligarchy and security apparatus. So they all were swayed in the same direction. And how he ended? He ended with starting an idiotic war with Prussia. And the result of it was actually the creation of a united Germany and the fall of regime of Louis Bonaparte III. But if he would not have this war with Germany, he could have ruled forever, until his death. He was not facing any fundamental threats within the country. And with Putin, the situation is very much the same. But this mistake is a logical mistake. It's not an accidental mistake. It's a mistake that is doomed to happen, because such regimes, they need to confirm their legitimacy not through elections, but through scoring certain foreign space victories.
Ilya, let me ask you, I agree with you what you said, by the way, before about all diplomats and most leaders actually having a certain need for greed, if you will, that they're all motivated by this. Are there any leaders right now in Europe, for example, within NATO, the EU, who are not just there for the greed, that they are actually there for their people, for the democracy, or are they all part of the same cabal of they're just out for themselves and what they can get out of it? Do you see anybody that stands out?
Look, it's hard to judge people. You need to know them intimately to be able to give such opinions. Say, I know Zelensky personally. And that's why I know that Zelensky is not motivated by greed. He has done gazillion mistakes, which I totally disagree with, but they were genuinely mistakes. I think that Zelensky's motivation was always very genuine and the right one. He wanted to do good for his country. I think that definitely there are other people in Europe who are thinking the same and doing the same. But at the end of the day, we all are human beings, right? And it's very hard to separate our political position with our personal interests, and sometimes we justify that we are making certain statements for a good reason, but very often it has a selfish motivation, a motivation of political competition, a political struggle. That's the nature of us as humans. But history would always tell, who was motivated with what, and whether we have a positive personality or a negative personality. I think that right now, and especially in Europe, people are so submerged in this very minor and very short-living issues. So there is a strong deficit of leaders with a vision. I don't see Churchills of today. There are people who are stronger and more long-term thinking, like Merz, who came to power in Germany. He is, to my mind, is a more long-term thinking personality than was Schulz. But whether he would be able to score and to come to the very end and defend Europe from a possible aggression, I don't know. In Poland, right now, we have a very difficult situation when the country totally understands the threat that is coming from the east, and all three major forces that exist inside Poland, they all are motivated to defend Poland, genuinely motivated to defend Poland. But the interest of fighting with each other has a higher priority than the defense. So they all swear to the public that they're doing everything possible to defend their country, but actually their energy is consumed with fighting with each other. What can we do?
And often they will use Ukraine or other external issues as a political football. That's what's been immensely frustrating about watching Polish politics unfold. We're all for Ukraine, our own survival, and yet, so many own goals. I wanted to put a slightly sort of, if we zoom the telescope out, you talked about Putin's motivations being far easier to understand than if one were to look at Dugin, Patrushev, who does seem to be driven by some rather bizarre ideas and figures like that. If we look at Putin as simply someone who has, managed to build a big stash of gold and now is intent on securing it and his own security, everything makes obviously a lot more sense. But it's not just him, is it? And it's no coincidence that this is all happening now at this point, when they start to reach the age when they need to think about inheritance, when they need to think about succession. And there is no inheritance mechanism. There's no succession mechanism. And this is a repeated theme in Russian culture. If you go back to Turgenev and Otsia Dieti, this huge breakpoint between generations, this psychological breakpoint. But here we're looking at no culture of transition, of wealth, of status. And really what we're seeing is kind of a massive fight unfolding as these guys who made all their money in the 90s at that crucial transition period, they're now reaching the end of their lives and they don't know how to pass any of this stuff on.
You're absolutely right when you're actually right at the spot of the root of the problem of the modern day Russia. Is that because again, Putin was never coming to power as a charismatic dictator. It was not Hitler, and everybody was just standing behind him, and who he could do whatever decision he wanted. He was always the personified system of checks and balances. He was always the spider in the center of a certain web. He was always the universal balancer and the judge in all the confrontation between different groups of elites. And when he was coming to power, he was a very poor guy. He was actually appointed as the person who knows, how to create all those balances and stabilize the system, because actually the main requests, the main ask on behalf of Russian elites was to actually prevent their property from being redistributed in the next round of fight, because that's what's happening under Yeltsin all the time, and that's what Yeltsin understood as what democracy is. But Putin had to stop it, and right now Putin, at the same time, he is the wealthiest in the system, but at the same time he is a total hostage to the system. That's why he even publicly said that he is a slave who is being chained to this boat of Russian government, of Russian statehood, and he has nowhere to go because everybody needs him. And the only way to actually break this vicious circle was with, to my mind, was with a thoughtful sanctions policy. You know, inflict pain, but at the same time provide the way out. So generate a split within the Russian elite, you know, create an immense danger to critical parts of the system, but also show the path they need to follow to get away from this danger. And this danger could come both on the financial side with the sanctions per se, but also it can come from the partisans' activity, from the attacks on property, even personal attacks on those people. But they feel of danger because they feel danger coming from the Putin system to them, but they don't see a counter danger which is coming from like collective West, from the Rammstein coalition. And that's why they're sitting still. You know, they're interested in preserving the system, and they're interested in keeping Putin within the system. He is their guarantor. He is the universal preventer of things. He is this balance here. So we need to rethink the whole policy about Russia, but it's all doable. You know, if there would be a conscious effort, the system can be broken, and similar systems were broken. They existed before in the human history. It's not a unique phenomenon. It's very easy to read about them in the history books, and it's possible to break them.
What is unique, though, of course, is that never in history has an intelligence service, and in particular an intelligence service that has gone through a process of sort of, let's say, a hostile or not even hostile takeover of the sort of mafia, 90s mafia. Never in human history has an intelligence service had a country. That may be a little more difficult to perhaps uproot.
No, I would disagree with this for the first time. Because again, if you would refer to that system of Louis Bonaparte III, you said security apparatus and the large business and the state bureaucracy. That's the triangle of that power. It's very well documented. So at that time already, you know, this merge between the criminal world, the large business, and the security apparatus, it's already happened. You know, maybe it was just like technologically on a different level, because there was no internet at that time. There was no globalization that exists right now. There was no these cryptocurrencies that you can move and hide in the different parts of the world. That actually just creates a bigger demand for international cooperation. That's why we cannot take Russia as just an isolated system, because it is integrated, and there are serious international forces which actually support this regime. They can say a lot of good things about how they despise Putin, but they're actually interested in preservation of him, because that's also part of the global stability. And when I am talking about the Biden's administration, I'm specifically naming part of this establishment which was interested in preserving the status quo, and which was interested in keeping Putin at where he is right now.
Well, we're back in agreement on that one. I think this obsession with status quo, the reflexive control, I guess, as it's called, of the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, others, was extraordinary. You know, this belief that that Putin was a psychopath. I mean, he, in his own measure, he has psychopathic traits. Of course, he does, as all dictators, especially ones who've inhabited the Kremlin for so long, get extremely paranoid. But he is not irrational, I think, to the extent that he would burn the earth down. Because if he's looking for security, then these ideas don't match. But I think within the US administration, they absolutely believed they were dealing with a psychopathic monster, which you have to tread on eggshells around. Is that your impression?
No, absolutely. Putin is not a suicide bomber. He is paranoid, and as all obsession makes him in certain ways irrational, but it's he's paranoid about his security. He would not start a world war if he would believe that it would go nuclear. He actually would easily start a world war because he understands that the West is more concerned about nuclear arms. That's why I think that he believes that he can always blackmail the West with using nukes, and the West would always retreat.
Yes, well, there's good evidence to show that that's quite effective as a strategy, and he has Karaganov, who does the crazy stuff, and Medvedev, who does all the crazy stuff. He doesn't.
And he cultivates those people. He needs those people. Yeah,
exactly. That's it. David, over to you.
Yeah, Ilya, what do you think about? I just read. I was not surprised, but I was sad when I read that. One of the concessions that Zelensky is considering, at least temporarily, is giving up Ukraine's bid for joining NATO. I knew that would have to come eventually, but I'm still disappointed that it has to get to that point. What do you think about that? How realistic is it? Do you think it's just temporary and just part of the negotiations, or what do you make of his statement saying that?
And is NATO worth anything anymore? That's the other angle here. Is he giving substantial up?
I think that David is absolutely right. He has to be sorry. I am sorry for you guys that Ukraine is dropping this idea of joining NATO. I have to be sorry for you. You not have to be sorry for Ukraine.
No, I'm always sorry for us, so that's okay. But thank you.
NATO is fundamentally weaker without Ukraine.
Absolutely. The only real, I think that the
Let
only
me ask you this, Ilya. Let me ask you
is Ukraine.
about this question. As you know, the past security assurances, guarantees for Ukraine were totally worthless. So if at least temporarily or even permanently, Ukraine does give up its wishes, its desire to join NATO, can you foresee any security guarantees that Europe can give that will actually be worth a damn?
No.
Good answer.
It's very simple. You see, the problem is that I don't believe that the security guarantees that NATO is giving to its members are worth much.
Good point.
I really do not believe that NATO would effectively honor Article 5 obligation if Putin attacks, say, Lithuania. On paper, maybe, it could lead to a strange war of 1940, but I don't believe it would result in any serious response to defeat aggressor, if God forbid something like this would happen. And there are no other security guarantees which are more powerful than Article 5 at the moment on this planet. So no, I don't believe it, and I think that that any security guarantee you can think of should be based on one simple idea: your readiness to fight. The only country in Europe who is really genuinely ready to fight is Ukraine. That's why how you can ask for security guarantees from a country which is not ready to fight for a country which is ready to fight.
Ilya, I just did an interview earlier today, and it made me very angry, which is not unusual that I get very angry about this. But I said, look, okay, if they want to say that we're not going to have Ukraine join NATO so we don't upset the Kremlin, why don't the countries such as Germany, France, and the UK get together and say, okay, we're going to do our own bilateral agreement, but not just say we're going to do an agreement. We're going to put boots on the ground and we're going to enforce a no-fly zone. And if Putin wants to test that, go for it. Why the hell don't they do that?
But the thing is that Putin certainly is more willing to test it than British, Germans, or French.
Yeah,
that's
they
the point.
They don't want
That's
to
the
test
point. They won't do it. They won't do it. I know that. It's called cowardice, and I speak about that a lot. You're right.
I think it's a waste of time, which is very bad for the peace process. To me, the security guarantees is actually that's the biggest bargaining chip that you can drop. I think that Putin would be even willing to sacrifice his possessions in Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. If he would be given a deal which would allow him inside Russia to say that he scored the victory. And that's what I think needs to be negotiated at the table there. But in terms of security guarantees, I think that what needs to be done, and that needs to be done in parallel to the peace negotiations, it's not a part of peace negotiations, it's a separate process, is the regional security alliance on the eastern flank of NATO, from Finland to Romania, with obviously participation of Ukraine. And it's a win-win situation. Ukraine can actually bring a lot for the security guarantees for those countries, because it has a lot of veterans who right now have nowhere to go to. The country is destroyed. There's no money to pay them. There is no industry with jobs. There is no yet any reconstruction efforts, but they know how to fight. And then we have these Baltic states, primarily Poles, which have money and which has a problem, and they can definitely finance the operation to secure their eastern borders, and it's a win-win situation. It's like experienced fighters, and that's the best deterrence you can think about for the Russian army, because Russia doesn't want to confront the same guys, which they know so well about, and it's not a question whether the Article 5 would be involved. They don't want to start the same war, which they were fighting in Ukraine on a larger front. They would be very easy to enter Lithuania knowing that there would be no resistance or minimal resistance. But if they would expect to see the same Ukrainian army there, they would think not twice, three times maybe.
I want to come back to this ideological point of view, because I find this absolutely fascinating, because, of course, a big part of the active measures that are playing out is to try to convince especially evangelicals and those who are considered more on the right of politics but come from a religious persuasion, to try to persuade them that actually Russia is closer to them in terms of a value set and beliefs than their fellow Americans and the Democrats are. And it creates this sort of illusion of, a wonderfully moral, Christian, righteous country, etc. You have Kirill, who's Gudayev, I think is his real name, and I forget his sort of KGB. Gundayev. I forget his KGB sort of handle, as it were. But this also seems to be incredibly effective, unfortunately. But what you're saying here is the elite, including Gudayev, Putin, and others, they actually have no values. They're a moral vacuum, and really this is all artifice. This would seem to me to be a really crucial message to get across to those who are convinced by the propagandistic line that actually Russia is spiritually closer to them than their fellow Americans.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like there is one fundamental figure which actually tells you all. You can stop speculating about elites and about what they are. I totally agree with you. Like Russia is totally morally bankrupt, and I can tell you a lot of stories from the inside of elites, and starting personally from Mr. Putin, and his sexual preferences, moral preferences, like whatever. But even forgetting about all
That's a
the
real
fight.
tease there.
Yeah.
Don't spell it out, but that's something for people to
That's our next
imagine,
live
yeah.
stream, Ilya.
Yeah, just like 5%, 5% of Russians go to church regularly. 5%. And 50% of Ukrainians. That's the number. The whole fight about Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine is not even like this political Russian world and whatever. It's primarily motivated with money, because half of revenues of Russian Orthodox Church was coming from Ukraine because of the number of people who attend in church. That's period. That's it. That's the real reason.
Now I understand why they're so upset. It was a huge drain on their revenues.
Absolutely. And by the way, the same Gundyaev that you have mentioned, despite that, he's being in KGB and everything, he was the most reluctant to speak publicly on the war in Ukraine, also because of money. And he started speaking only when he completely lost it. Because he had his skin in the game there, and he tried to keep it as long as possible. And only when the financial flows between the countries became impossible, only then when he started to speak up loud.
2018, wasn't it? That's when the Ukrainian Orthodox Church broke away formally.
Even not at that time, because at that time, they broke. So there was this church conflict. There was a debate before that. Ukrainian church, it was declared as illegal, as heretical by the Russian Orthodox Church. But as soon as it was legalized by the Patriarchate in Constantinople, only then he became like a legal church. But still, Russian Orthodox could transfer money across the border from Ukraine to Russia. There was no restriction. The real restriction came after 2022, and even not immediately after the beginning of large-scale invasion. So it was a certain period of time, and that's why, as I said, it's very easy to track, what Kirill was saying, and when he started to publicly support the war, when the money stopped coming.
And this is a really interesting point, isn't it? Because if the motivation there is revenues, and it's very much business, and it's very much almost an inheritance of the kind of those who arrived on top in the late 90s, and the sort of the brutal struggles that took place to see who would own, the heights of the economy at that point. And then you have this merger between essentially the Siloviki and the mafia. Of course, I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. I happened to be in St. Petersburg at the time, teaching English at a Finnish oil company. So I heard from their executives all the inside stories about what was going on in Sobchak's office, and this sort of merger that was happening at the time. That would have been 96, 97, 98, prior to the full-scale crisis. I was living in a communalka, so I heard lots of other interesting stuff, as well as you say, the sort of moral vacuum of daily life. But if Putin starts to not be able to be an arbiter between these forces and the various other economic interests that have grown since then, what happens at that point? Whether Putin loses the ability to control it or something happens to him, do you see this all coming out on the surface? The fights coming out into the open. How brutal could it get?
Well, it can be pretty brutal, and that's what everybody is afraid of, and that's what Putin is speculating on. That if not me, it would be a brutal fight between you guys. that I am the guarantor, the Lord Protector for every single one of you, and that's what people understand and accept. Is the lesser evil. In general, the whole reign of Vladimir Putin can be titled the lesser evil. There's nothing worse than the lesser evil concept. That this is what he was promoting all the time. Even when he was dealing with the genuine grassroots movements, like movement of Alexei Navalny, Putin never said that I am not corrupt. He said, yes, I am corrupt, but Navalny is as corrupt as me. That I have already stole a lot, but when he would come to power, he would spend a lot of time stealing more, and and he would take a lot from you. So why would you need to change me for Navalny if we are the same?
Is he wrong? That's the key question. Is he wrong in that judgment? That's a difficult one.
It's a very difficult one, and I agree. But it's a separate
That's
topic for a separate stream. Yes, but that's that's what people felt, and that's why this argument is getting across to their hearts. He was never saying that I am ideal. He was always saying that I am the lesser evil, and that's why even in the military situation, we are surrounded by enemies, and these enemies they care about you even less than I do. I care not much, but they even less so, and that's why you better stick with me.
And of course, he's been utterly indiscriminate, brutal, and cruel with regards to Ukraine. So there's absolutely no kind of excuse there. It's been genocidal in its character, and it's been horrific and indiscriminate. But people will maybe be a little bit surprised, maybe annoyed by the phrase I'm going to use here. If you compare, say, Stalin's behavior and his absolute paranoia in liquidating, not just people who have demonstrable evidence against them, but just everyone he has even the slightest suspicion against, including close family members of his wife's family. If you compare that, then Putin's terror regime for most of his reign, and indeed even now, is relatively surgical. It's relatively efficient and precise in targeting people who, or putting resources towards people that he sees as a genuine threat. It's not totally indiscriminate. Now, people are going to find that a fairly horrific idea, but comparing it to the Stalinist period, it's a very different dynamic.
No, but Putin never praised Stalin. He always praised Brezhnev. His regime is a Brezhnev regime. And Brezhnev regime, even officially titled in the Russian history as a period of stagnation.
Zastoy, yes.
Zastoy, yes. So Brezhnev was a relaxation, and that's what Putin is offering to people. He came as the aftermath, as a sort of counter-revolution of the turbulent 90s, which were the difficult years for Russians, and Russians were so shocked during this period of reform, which, by the way, these reforms are heavily associated with the West and with the democracy and, with all the changes, and collapse of the Soviet Union. So obviously, emotionally, it's these things are linked in everybody's heads. That's, democracy means misery, and democracy means corruption, and West means corruption because West is democracy, and it's all mashed together. And when Putin is coming and saying, okay, so with my reign, you have more money because of the oil prices went up, but it doesn't matter. You feel you have more money, that and I am anti-Western. People say, okay, so being Western means that we are miserable. Being anti-Western means that we are prosperous. It's quite clear. It's Pavlov's dog's reflex that is being created in everybody's heads. But he never wanted to go back to Stalin's times. And he sometimes is exploiting it here and there, some notions like great power, everybody respected us, world World War II, and as Russians call it, Great Patriotic War, and we defeated Hitler. But Stalin was seen inside Russia as the impersonification of a great idea. When he was fighting enemies, doing all those purges, oppression and whatever, they were enemies of the idea. They were never enemies of Stalin. They were always enemies of the communist idea. And Putin doesn't have a single idea. He never offered anything to the people. The only thing that I can remember during his already 26 years in power was the idea to catch up on Portugal, the poorest country in Europe. He said, like, one day, we need to live, as a European country, and we need to catch up Portugal, which is the poorest, become better than Portugal. Obviously, nobody got excited that the great Russia would live, in the same fashion as Portugal. So he eventually dropped even this because he couldn't manage to get even there. He couldn't catch up on Portugal. And after that, all his ideas was just patriotism. It's just that we need to love our country, but no objectives, no space, Olympic Games, which also correlates a lot with the famous Russian joke, because Nikita Khrushchev was promising to build a communism in the country by 1980. And obviously it was impossible. And when Brezhnev realized that and said, 1980 we will have Olympic Games in the country. So everybody was saying, as joking, that instead of communism, we are getting Olympic Games. And that's very much correlates with what Putin has done. So instead of some grand vision and great projects, he had these Olympic Games in 2014. But after that, there are no even Olympic Games because
and
we
the
are
World
now
Cup.
banned. Yeah.
One could say that the hosting the World Cup was the peak of that sort of peaceful period, and all downhill from there.
That's also true.
Well, we have to wrap it up. We're up against the clock. But one thing I wanted to say is, you had mentioned before, Ilya, that you don't believe that NATO would come to the aid of the Baltics, for example, if Estonia were invaded. They would call on Article 5 and nobody would come. Well, how about this? I think that it would be the ultimate irony in, 1, 2, or 3 years, if in fact Putin did make a move on the Baltics and Article 5 was enacted and Ukraine came to the aid of the Baltics. What do you think about that?
But that's exactly what I was saying. That's what needs to be done. But to do this, you need to do a little bit of preparation.
Yes, absolutely.
Work. You better deploy some of Ukrainian troops in those countries. And obviously, you don't need to deploy those troops which are in action right now at the front. But you can deploy, say, private military companies which are made of freshly minted war veterans. It's more than 1 million of them.
Well, hasn't Zelensky actually offered those assets to NATO? I think he has.
He has, but I think that he behaves very much in the PR way. So it's just a public statement. Zelensky is making a lot of public statements. He made a public statement, we do this 50 billion drones program in the United States. And it's like saying it's the same tech transfer thing in Europe. And then, yes, we are coming to rescue, because that correlates with internal Ukrainian mood. That's what Ukrainians are joking all the time. Okay, we need to forget about NATO because it's NATO needs to join us and not us joining NATO. That's a very popular Ukrainian joke. And Zelensky being an actor, being a public media personality, a celebrity, he is playing on this on these public feelings. But he needs to offer particular frameworks. He needs to offer particular mechanisms. He needs to formulate these proposals, not jokingly, but seriously. And I think that seriously, that's exactly what needs to happen.
Exactly. We talked last time about the little delusion in the West about drone warfare and our ability to, well, that's one maybe for next time. That's a whole conversation in itself. But I think gradually we're going to come to appreciate that Ukraine has stuff that is absolutely essential for our defense, which maybe some countries haven't quite kind of twigged yet. Well, David, I think we're going to probably going to wrap it up there. And
Jonathan, I think we're going to see
huge
you
pleasure.
again in the very near future. What do you think?
Yes, I very much hope so.
And I would love to. And thanks, guys, for having me. It's always a big pleasure talking to you. And I think that one day we need to get together in person.
Yes, well, it'll be in Kiev.
And
we'll
you're
definitely
buying.
encourage
Yes,
David
absolutely.
to come over.
Absolutely. Okay, Jonathan and Ilya, again, thank you. And I hope we see you very, very soon. And I think we will. You all take care.
Have a